Whakataka tiho ki te muri, whakataka tiho ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. He aka ana, te ata kura, he tiu hi huka, hi ho hunga, ti hei mauri ora. Thank you everyone, and it's lovely to have such a great attendance on a Tuesday afternoon. We did a geography webinar a few weeks ago now, covering the research standards. So if you did wish to, if you missed that, or if you wanted to have another look, just have a look at the New Zealand Board of Geography Teachers website and you'll be able to find it there. My name's Amy Dennis and I'm the National Assessment Advisor for Geography. And today we're going to be having a quick look at the global standards at Level 2 and Level 3. Thank you to those who provided feedback after the research webinar. I've made a few changes just based on the feedback you said, so thanks for that. So I'll have a look at the key aspects of the standard. We'll look at some of the context that works well. We'll give you some resources that are going to help you at your kura. We'll do a bit of a fun activity. Don't worry, it'll be easy for a Tuesday afternoon. It's multi-choice. And we'll have some questions and answers as well. Now, the questions I've got have been submitted prior to this, but I am aware that if you're watching it, further questions might come to mind, in which case you can contact one of the kaiarahi, and I've just popped their emails there, and they'll be able to help you. Fantastic. Just a few housekeeping things that you'll notice. Firstly, people have been muted, so if you can stay muted, that'd be great. And also you can have your videos off as well, just because we are recording it. Just due to numbers, we won't be having any sort of feedback or comments come up, but we will be doing a poll later on, and I'll show you how to work all the functions to do with that. Fantastic. So let's have a look at the global standards. As I say, we're going to be looking at level 2 and 3 today. We'll start with level 2, cover the main bits, and then pop in and have a look at level 3. So firstly, with the level 2, when you look at the title of the standard, that's where the emphasis is. So you'll notice there's kind of 3 parts there. There's an explain, there's a geographic topic, and there's a global scale. And so at all times, it's good to keep the title in mind. So the topic you're choosing needs to be geographic, and that global nature, so the evidence of the globalness of it must be explicit or clear throughout. Okay? We'll have a look at some examples and things later on to give a bit further detail about that. First thing you must do at the level 2 is, of course, describe the pattern. Now, these can be spatial or temporal. We do tend to get more spatial, but that's just a preference that schools might have. Spatial doesn't work any better than temporal, and vice versa. Key bit there, though, is you're using geographic terminology when describing the pattern. Obviously, depends on what pattern you're looking at, but if you're doing spatial, some of the words that could apply to the pattern could be linear or cluster or peripheral. Okay? There's more words than that. That's just some examples. Now, remember, it has to be global. So if we just stay on the spatial pattern for a little bit, if you are doing a topic and let's say there's a cluster in Africa, that's going to be insufficient because Africa isn't global. So when you're deciding what topic to do, just make sure there's a good, clear pattern, it's a geographic topic, and it's global. Staying with spatial, an unclear pattern is also problematic. So if you've picked something that's dispersed throughout the globe, yes, it's global, but that's really challenging for the learners. So my advice would be to stick where there's a really clear pattern. And I've got some maps and things later on where I'm going to show examples of that. If you're doing a temporal pattern, so over time, once again, you still have to use that terminology. Depending on what the pattern is, you might use something like exponential or fluctuating or cyclic, but still has to be global. And you'll notice that there's a difference there in the grades with the description. If we go to the next part of the standard, what will often happen is that the description of the pattern will continue on when you're explaining the factors or the processes that have contributed to that pattern. Notice here that you have all the achieve, merit, and excellence has the explain. So you must say why or how. We need clear links between the factor or process and the pattern. So the linear pattern here is caused by this, but over there, the cluster is caused by this. Right? The verb is explained, so once again, you've got to say the why bit. Significance of the topic, this is what it means for people. Once again, because it's in the standard, you've got the explaining. So it's got to have the why bit. When we're looking at examples that have worked well for level 2 global context, we get a wide variety that work really well. And I think the key thing is think about the learners at your kura and what they identify with. It's got to have a clear global pattern, but it's also got to have reasons that your students can understand why there's the pattern. And we'll look at that more with level 3, because obviously there's the difference in the curriculum levels there. Right, so level 3, the standard here has the analyze. So the difference between level 2 and 3 is level 2 is explain, level 3 goes to analyze. So explain is the why, but to analyze, you're really breaking it down into the small parts and looking at it in more depth. So the context you're going to use will likely be different than the level 2 context. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. We have a look at the standard. You'll find again some of it's similar. You've got to describe the pattern using geographic terminology. So just like level 2, we expect the cluster or the cyclic, those sorts of words when you're describing it. When you're explaining what's contributed to the pattern, you need the clear links between the pattern and the process. Particularly at level 3, when you're looking at the smaller parts, because the reason for the cluster over here could be different to the reason for the peripheral pattern over there. So you've got to make sure that your learners understand that and cover those aspects. It's also got to be level 8 of the curriculum. Now, teachers, you can give them the maps or the graph to support them. And I'd encourage you to think really carefully about what they look like, just to give your learners the best possible opportunity. I've got some examples in a few slides just to show you what that could look like. Flicking to the significance of it, notice here it's social and economic significance. So both needs to be covered for the grades. Notice that the achieve and the merit has the explain, which is the why bit, but the excellence has the evaluation word. So what that means here is there has to be some indication that things have been judged or compared. Some examples of what that could look like, and once again, it depends on what context you're using. You could have a sort of most to least, so the most significant social, then the next, and then the next. So just a basic most to least. You could also organize it in terms of positive and negative, because remember, when you're looking at social and economic, it can be positives and negatives. Other ways you can do it as well, they are going to depend on what context you've used a little bit. Bit of talking from me. What we're going to do is a quick activity. Don't worry, it's multiple choice. What we're going to have is 5 maps. I'm going to get you to have a look at the map. I'll flick to it so you can see here. And what I'm going to get you to do is choose on whether you think that map would be suitable for a global study? And we're going to have 3 options. We've got a yes, a no, and a maybe. Now, just when you're answering this, your name and things don't come up. So we just organize all the answers together. So have a go, just have a quick look. Based on the map I've given you, what do you think? And then Cassandra, I think you can pop the poll up, or is that me?
Yep, no, I can launch that.
Wonderful, thank you. Here we go. So just have a click, a yes or no and a maybe, just based on the map that you see. And as I say, your name and things isn't going to come up. So awesome, 100% answered. That's awesome. If I click end poll, can they see it, Cassandra? Or I'll share results. There we go. Cool. Can we see the results there? Yep, Cassandra, can we see those results?
They should be visible on their screens.
Awesome. Great. So what we've got here is most of you clicked yes, and that is correct. Okay. I'll tell you why I think this could be a good map to use. Firstly, you've got a clear pattern. So the main pattern is linear, so it's within the tropics, but you've also got sub-patterns of clusters or sublinear patterns, whatever you choose to call them. Okay? It's clearly global. So you've got a clear pattern, it's global. Now, the other consideration is thinking, can the students explain why? And with coral reefs, there are clear reasons why there's that pattern. Obviously, it depends on your learners and what they're interested in, but that could be a really good one to do. Okay, let's just flick to the next one. Oh. Let's just say, here we go. Here we have a map. Top music genres. Do you think this is suitable for a global study? And we're just going a yes, a no, not sure. And so don't worry, your details don't come up. Cool, 100% answered. Awesome. In that so you can see and share. Great. So 57% of you said no, and I would agree with that. I think this is quite a fun map, so I would use it in class, but it is quite difficult. So let's run through the criteria. Are there some clear patterns? Well, kind of. If you have a closer look, and it depends on what device you're looking at, but if we just take the blue kind of gradient, the blues actually have quite a different range of genres, from blues to classical to folk to hip hop. So look, I'm not a great music person, but I'm not sure if they've got a lot in common. So it's really difficult to see the pattern there. The other thing is why? Why are those genres in certain places? And I think that's really difficult to cover concisely and neatly. So my advice is, it's a really cool map. Great as a do now or at the end of the day. Interesting geography, but I wouldn't use top music genres for the global study. Awesome. Let's just pop to our next map. Well, let me flick. Great. Here we have rainforests. Actually, it should say tropical rainforests. And we'll just pop the poll up. So just a yes, a no, or a not sure. Oh, you're all too quick on a Tuesday. Fantastic. 100% said yes. And they are correct. Much in the same way as the coral reefs, you've got a clear linear pattern. Within that linear pattern, you've got some sub-patterns, but it's really easy to see. The reasons for those tropical rainforests there are also very evident. Okay? So easy to see, nice pattern, it's global. That would be a great one to use as well. Just stop sharing that. We've got 2 more to do, just to keep you on the ball. This one there, international tourist arrivals. Once again, we're going to have the same criteria, so just a yes, a no, or a not sure. Fantastic, and it looks like we've heard from everyone. Well done there. So tourism, aspects of tourism can work really well in a global study, depending on what aspect you use. Problem is with this map is there's a lot going on. Whilst there are clear patterns with a lot of aspects of tourism, this map I think is just too complicated for the learners to make a really good go of the standard. The reason why is you've got spatial, so you've got things plotted on the map, but you've also got temporal, and you've got different circumferences of the circle showing that. So if you have a look in Europe, it's really hard to tell what's going on. So I'm not saying don't do tourism, I'm just saying this map is pretty tricky for a lot of the learners. So yes, use it in class. Yes, aspects of tourism work really well for global, but I wouldn't use this map. Cool, and we'll just do one last one. 5's always a good number, right? Daily confirmed COVID cases, New Zealand. What have we got from 2020, 2021? We're just going to do a yes, a no, a maybe. Oh, a little bit of changing around there. Okay. And we'll just have a look at those results and talk about it. So firstly, kind of like tourism, aspects of COVID can work for the global study. However, if you look at this graph, we can see temporal change, so change over time. The problem is it's New Zealand. It's not global. Okay? So whatever graph you're looking at really needs to be global, and it would need to show the different areas so that you can see. Okay? What I wouldn't do, what we have found, is where teachers have given your learners, say, 10 different graphs of different areas, that's also proved problematic for the learners to see clear patterns. So I would think carefully about the resources you're giving them. This graph wouldn't work, but you may, I have looked online in the past and found some really good graphs where you can see COVID over time in different parts of the globe, and that will show some clear patterns. Okay. So interesting graph, interesting to see the patterns, great as a do now, but because it's New Zealand, that's not going to suffice for the standard. Great. I'm going to leave that up, and while I leave that up, what a lot of people found value in last time was the questions and the answers. And we've had some awesome questions submitted beforehand, and it is worth listening to these because I think you'll get some really great insights. After the questions and answers, I am going to go through some really cool resources that we've got that you can access now, and some really exciting things coming up. So I'll just leave that up. You can fill that out just as I chat about the questions and answers. First question we got. Are there some global topics that are unsuitable, such as terrorism, gun ownership, fashion, and human rights? The answer is yes. There is going to be some topics that are unsuitable. Firstly, they need to fulfill the criteria of the standard. So needs to be global, needs to be clear pattern with clear processes that have caused that. It's also got to be appropriate for the curriculum level. Now, the other considerations is thinking about your learners in your school and your kura and what's going to work for them. For example, I know some schools where events have happened, they wouldn't choose to use that as part of a global study. So, for example, a Christchurch school might choose not to use earthquakes just because of what the students may have been through in the past. So you've kind of got that criteria of does it fit the standard, but you've also got the criteria of does it fit your school, your kura, what's accepted, and what's going to work for your learners. Okay? Later on, I'll give you some examples if you're not sure what could work for global. Next question. Can the students choose their own topic for the global study? Yes, they can, technically. But there's some things you've got to keep in mind. Firstly, you need to make sure the maps or the graphs or whatever they're using are going to work for the standard. Like with that graph I showed you for New Zealand COVID, a neat graph, but not going to work for the standard as it is. So does it fit the standards criteria? Does it fit the criteria for your school and your learners and kind of what's going to work for them? The third thing I'd encourage you to think about is what's actually going to work for you. Because if you've got learners doing different topics, you need to be checking what resources they're doing, thinking about the teaching and learning for all that. And sometimes that can get quite complicated. So the answer is, can they use their own? Technically, yes, but you might want to think it through a little bit. The next question, we had a few based around this. So I'll just read the version I've got, but there were a few questions that were similar. To gain excellence, do you need to discuss a variation in the pattern, or can you include two different patterns? Okay. And as I say, there are a few questions around that. So firstly, I'll say is we need to be clear what standard we're talking about, because the level 2 urban standard has some wording that's similar to that. We're just discussing the global standard. So firstly, got to be clear on what the criteria is. Okay? So check the standard, check the clarifications, and just check in any NCEA documents about that. Okay? Also keep in mind that excellence has several criteria. So you've got to meet all that criteria for excellence to get it. So you couldn't say, oh, they're achieved here, a merit here, an excellence here. So overall they get an excellence. They must meet that excellence criteria. An excellence, so let's go back, I think, to a short answer of probably what they're wanting. Do you need variation in the pattern? The answer is usually you do, particularly when you think at level 3, when it's analysed, where you need that further detail. Okay, so part of that is really going to be the variation. If we go back to those maps that we looked at before, say with the coral, you'll see there was a main linear pattern, but there were subclusters or sub-patterns within that. Now, the reason for those sub-patterns could be different. And that's the sort of thing you'd expect to see when you're starting to analyse. Now, I know some of you might be sitting there thinking, oh, now I'm not quite sure. At the end of this, I'm going to give you some resources that you can take away and have a look, and that will help you. We also have the Kairahi, who you can message as well with that. Next question. The pattern question always stumps the kids, and having enough to write about without hitting on processes. What is your feedback to get them to delve into the pattern and not the processes? A few things I'd say. Firstly, the evidence is marked in the entirety. So it doesn't matter if the pattern and the processes are a little intertwined. That is okay. Also for task 2, you need to link the pattern and the process anyway. So firstly, it's going to be okay. Second thing though, is just making sure they get the depth that they need. Some learners will introduce the process at task 1. For example, if we're just going back to the coral reefs again, there is a linear pattern between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn of coral reefs, which is caused by, let's say, sea temperature. Okay? So they can introduce it there, and then in task 2, they could say the linear pattern between the tropics is caused by sea temperature, and then go into the greater depth, and then go into your variations within it. So that's what it could look like. So the short answer is, doesn't really matter if they're a little bit mixed up. That's okay. Might be something you get them to consider when they're editing their work as well. Next question. How do you make sure that students describe global patterns and not regional patterns? Okay, so global, not regional. My answer is, I think part of that has to do with the teaching and learning program. So doing activities prior to the assessing, so that students know the difference. And actually those sorts of things are great do-nows. Even if you've got junior classes as well, they can be, those sort of things can be really good. Secondly, if you're analysing the global pattern, okay, and you're looking at sub-patterns, you could very well be looking at regions. So hard to say there. I'll give you some resources later on where you can see the difference. Next question. How do you best link a pattern such as slavery to a cause such as poverty? Can you just discuss LDCs, or do you need a spatial aspect too? So firstly, I'd say slavery is not a pattern. Okay, slavery is the context. If you want the pattern words, the spatial words would be things like cluster or linear or peripheral, and you've got temporal words as well. Cyclic, fluctuating, exponential, those sorts of words. So you just got to be clear that they're using the right words for the context. So slavery wouldn't be the pattern. What else would I say on that one? They also need to be, when you're choosing what you're going to give them, they need to be able to fully explain why. And things like poverty in some areas can be really tricky. So if it's something that doesn't resonate with your learners or is getting quite complex, I would reconsider and think about something that your learners are going to get where it has clear reasons why there's that pattern. Part of that's thinking it through in the beginning of the teaching and learning program before you give them the assessment. So remember, the assessment isn't the entire teaching and learning. Couple more questions we've got here. How do you deal with an explanation of different patterns mentioned in task 2, but not identified in task 1? Well, part of the standard is you must describe the pattern. Doesn't really matter where you do it, you must describe it. So if we say tropical rainforest, if there's some lovely paragraphs on tropical rainforests and rainfall and ITCZ, all those sorts of things, they're great. But if they don't link to a pattern, then they're not going to achieve the standard. So they must link the processes or the factors to the pattern. If they don't do that, they're not going to achieve the standard. And our last question here, if the patterns described relate to different continents, what mark does it get? It's a bit of a tricky one to answer because it depends what they've written. Also, there's several criteria for each grade, and they've got to do all the criteria to get that grade. So a little bit hard to say. A few things to keep in mind. Must be global. So if you just talk about Africa, or if they just write about Africa, that's not going to be enough to achieve the standard. There must be some sort of global coverage. So Africa would not be sufficient. However, if we go back to the rainforest idea, it's okay, pardon me, when part of their explanation of rainforests and part of their explanation of the clusters, they talk about continents, and that would be okay. So keep it there, go back to the standard, read what it says, have a look at the clarifications. I'm aware that it is a Tuesday afternoon, and some of you might have had a pretty full-on day of teaching. So I'm going to give you some resources that are going to help you and tell you about a couple of exciting things going on too that you might not know. And these are new stuff that I didn't mention in the research one too. That's kind of neat. Firstly, if you log on to NCEA, the geography page, heaps of great resources there. It's got the standards, it's got the geography matrices, it's got the clarifications. Thoroughly recommend you read that. Exemplars of student work, national moderators reports. All of that stuff's really great, and you can access it when you feel you like to. One key one that sometimes people do miss is right down the bottom there, we've got the Geography Assessor Support Catalogue. Now, if you flick into that, a version of this comes up. I've just stuck 2 giant arrows on there because it pertains to the standard we're talking about today. But there's a whole lot of really great stuff that NCEA have organised to do with geography. So firstly, making assessor judgments. There's a little mini course you can do, having a look at judging different bits of student evidence. There's also one on global geographic topics, and I think that's really helpful when you're thinking about what topics will work and what doesn't work. If you scroll your eye down the list there, you can see there's other great geography courses that you can access. And as I say, you can do that at home, you can do it in your non-contact, you can do it when suits you. The only thing you need is an education sector login, and you can get that from your principal's nominee. So these things don't cost anything, you just need the login, and then you'll be able to access them. I do know that some could use those in their department meetings, these sorts of courses. They can be really useful. And a new thing that we are just starting to develop, so it's not going to be up till the end of this year or early next year, is focusing on the level 3 global standard and the level 3 geographic issue. We are going to have quite a few samples, likely to be about 10 samples within each, so 10 level 3 global. And what we will do is have student full exemplars. So not ones that I've written that really just look like an adult's written, actually written that students have submitted. And the great thing there is you can have a go at grading them, but in a section you can also see the commentary and see what grade the moderators will give it and the sorts of things they were looking for in the standard. So that's going to be really awesome as well. So it's not up yet. We will put some publicity up when that is done. But for now, we've got a lot of really great stuff that'll be there to help you. So thank you so much for your time today in talking about the global standards. We'll finish with a karakia. And just remember, of course, that the kairahi are there to help you and those NCEA resources as well. So inahia, te po, ke wātia, ai kua wātia. So thank you much, everyone. Have a fantastic afternoon. Really appreciate you coming today. Ka kite.